In the first section of the book, we are introduced to the concept of the habit loop, a simple yet powerful framework that explains how habits form and how they can be changed. The story of Eugene Pauly, a man whose brain was severely damaged in a car accident, serves as the basis for understanding this framework. Eugene had lost most of his memory, rendering him unable to recall recent events or recognize familiar faces. Despite this, Eugene continued to carry out routine tasks with precision, like walking to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee or visiting a particular restaurant. His ability to engage in these behaviors without conscious thought is a crucial clue in understanding how habits operate in the brain. The reason Eugene could still perform these actions lies in the way the brain organizes learned behaviors. When a behavior is repeated often enough, it becomes ingrained in a specific part of the brain, known as the basal ganglia, which is responsible for automating tasks. This part of the brain functions independently of the conscious mind, meaning it can carry out learned tasks without needing the individual's conscious input. This insight into Eugene's condition reveals that habits are not dependent on memory or awareness, but on the brain's ability to automate repetitive behaviors. The habit loop itself consists of three key elements: a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue is the trigger that initiates the habit, the routine is the behavior or action that follows, and the reward is the positive reinforcement that the brain associates with the action. The loop becomes a cycle where, once the reward is received, the brain is conditioned to expect it when the same cue is encountered. This cyclical process makes the behavior easier to repeat over time, as the brain starts to crave the reward associated with the routine. The habit loop is not a one-size-fits-all process. It works in a variety of contexts, whether for an individual trying to form a new habit or a company aiming to influence consumer behavior. Understanding how the loop functions can be transformative, not just for personal development but for organizational growth as well. The key takeaway is that by identifying the elements of the loop, recognizing the cues, analyzing the routines, and tweaking the rewards, we can influence and even change habits. By manipulating any of these components, new behaviors can be established or old ones can be modified. The concept of the habit loop is explored further through a series of real-life examples. One significant example is that of a woman named Lisa, who struggled with overeating. Despite her best intentions, Lisa repeatedly found herself reaching for snacks during the afternoon. This automatic behavior was tied to an emotional trigger. She felt stressed or bored, and the act of eating provided her with a temporary escape. By examining the habit loop in her behavior, Lisa realized that the cue for her snacking was not hunger, but the emotional trigger of feeling stressed. She recognized that she could change the routine by replacing eating with a different, healthier behavior, like taking a walk or drinking a glass of water. The reward of feeling better after a brief walk could serve as a substitute for the emotional comfort that snacking provided. This process of replacing an old routine with a new one while keeping the same cue and reward is central to changing habits. The lesson here is that habits are not fixed, and they can be changed by altering the routine. This is a critical point because it emphasizes that habits are not simply something that happen to us. They are within our control. By focusing on the cues and rewards, we can choose how we respond to them and, in doing so, reshape our behavior over time. Another key lesson in this section is the idea that willpower is not the key to breaking bad habits or forming new ones. Often, people think that breaking a habit requires sheer strength of will, but this approach can be ineffective and unsustainable. Instead, by understanding the habit loop, individuals can leverage their existing habits and modify them in a more deliberate way. Willpower alone is often not enough to overcome deeply ingrained routines, but by making small adjustments to the habit loop, lasting change becomes possible. This insight changes the way we think about habit formation. It's not about trying harder, but about understanding how our brains work and using that knowledge to our advantage. The lesson on the automatic nature of habits is expanded through the story of a woman named Margaret. Margaret had been a smoker for years, and despite multiple attempts to quit, she was unable to break the cycle of lighting a cigarette when she felt stressed. This behavior was deeply embedded in her habit loop. The stress she felt was the cue, and the act of smoking was the routine. The reward was the temporary sense of relaxation and relief from stress. Once Margaret realized the components of her habit loop, she was able to identify the cue and the reward and experiment with a new routine that would satisfy the craving in a healthier way. Instead of smoking when stressed, she replaced it with a different routine, like calling a friend or going for a short walk. Gradually, the new routine began to stick, and the old habit faded. This example demonstrates the power of understanding the loop. By identifying the cue and reward, one can make small changes that compound over time to create lasting behavioral shifts. The lesson of the habit loop has implications not only for individuals but also for organizations and society as a whole. For example, businesses and marketers use the habit loop to design products and experiences that encourage consumer habits. A prime example of this is the story of the introduction of Pepsodent, a toothpaste brand. In the early 20th century, the act of brushing teeth was not a common habit in many parts of the world. Pepsodent changed that by associating the habit of brushing with a pleasant sensation of freshness. They used a carefully crafted cue, smelling the minty freshness of the toothpaste, and a reward, the feeling of having a clean, smooth mouth. The result was that millions of people began to brush their teeth regularly, turning it into a daily habit. This example illustrates the power of the habit loop in shaping consumer behavior and how companies can create habits that drive business success. By understanding the mechanics of the habit loop, we can recognize that habits are not random. They are formed through a process that can be intentionally shaped and influenced. The ability to break down and modify the loop offers powerful tools for personal development, as well as business strategies. The insight here is that habits are not fixed behaviors. They are patterns that can be adapted to fit new circumstances, goals, and environments. With the right understanding and approach, habits can be changed, leading to lasting personal transformation and organizational success. Ultimately, the lesson from this section is that habits are central to who we are and how we behave, but they are also malleable. Understanding the habit loop empowers individuals to take control of their behaviors and reshapes how organizations think about influencing consumer actions. Whether changing personal habits or driving change within a company, the habit loop provides a framework for understanding how habits are formed, maintained, and altered. By focusing on the three components, cue, routine, and reward, individuals and organizations can create new behaviors or break old ones. Chapter 2. The Craving Brain: How to Create New Habits. The concept of craving lies at the heart of habit formation, driving behaviors through a powerful, often subconscious, yearning for a specific result. The creation of new habits involves understanding the role of craving as an engine that keeps the habit loop moving. Habits do not merely rely on the repetition of cues, routines, and rewards. Instead, they depend on a craving that develops as we go through the process over time. This craving compels individuals to act, drawing them back to the same actions repeatedly, reinforcing the connection between a cue and its associated reward. To understand how new habits are built, it's essential to recognize how craving evolves. When an individual repeatedly experiences a cue and the reward that follows a routine, the brain begins to anticipate the pleasure of that reward. This anticipation becomes a form of craving. With repeated cycles of cue, routine, and reward, the craving strengthens, embedding the behavior more deeply in the brain. Habits start as experiments. They become automatic actions when the brain anticipates the pleasure associated with the reward. This sense of anticipation triggers cravings, which then make the habit loop nearly unbreakable. One example of this process comes from the story of a man who used a new type of toothpaste, Pepsodent, in the early 20th century. During this period, brushing teeth was not a routine for many Americans. However, the toothpaste's formula, which included mint oils and citric acid, produced a tingling sensation on the tongue and gums, making users feel a distinct cleanliness in their mouths. This sensation was a new experience that became linked to brushing. As people continued to use the toothpaste, they began to crave the tingling freshness as a signal of cleanliness. Even though the sensation itself did nothing to improve dental health, this craving for the sensation made them stick to brushing, and over time, the habit of brushing teeth became ingrained in millions. The initial reward, a clean mouth, soon became coupled with a craving for the tingling sensation, creating a habit loop that made brushing feel incomplete without it. Cravings are essential for establishing a habit because they trigger the brain's reward centers, which drive behavior. When cravings are strong, they overpower the conscious mind, compelling individuals to act almost involuntarily. In this way, cravings enable people to establish new habits by creating a reward loop. Once the craving takes hold, it becomes a powerful motivator that pushes the person to seek out the cue again and repeat the behavior. Cravings also play a role in more complex scenarios, as seen in the story of Starbucks employees who were trained to handle challenging customer interactions. The company recognized that employees often faced stressful situations that made it difficult to maintain a positive attitude. To address this, Starbucks introduced a training program that helped employees develop new habits for handling stress. This program taught them to use cues, like a difficult customer, to trigger routines such as taking a deep breath, smiling, and offering assistance. The reward was the satisfaction of a positive interaction, which Starbucks encouraged employees to crave. Over time, as employees encountered more challenging customers, they began to anticipate the pleasure that came from successfully handling a situation. The craving for positive customer interactions became a motivator, embedding the habit of maintaining a calm and friendly demeanor. The formation of habits hinges on finding the right reward that can create a lasting craving. To create a new habit, it's necessary to link a behavior to a craving that is powerful enough to keep the individual returning to it. This craving could be for something physical, like a minty sensation, or something emotional, like a feeling of accomplishment. The stronger the craving, the more robust the habit will be, as cravings influence the brain's dopamine pathways. This biological aspect reveals that habits are more than just learned behaviors. They are intricately connected to the brain's pleasure centers. New habits emerge when people identify specific rewards that align with their personal or professional goals and use these rewards to generate a craving. The creation of a craving enables the habit loop to become self-sustaining, as people learn to associate a routine with a cue and reward. As they crave the reward, they are drawn to the behavior repeatedly, and the habit becomes automatic. Through practice and repetition, the craving becomes stronger, making the habit more ingrained and challenging to break. Creating new habits is thus about more than performing the same action repeatedly. It's about understanding and cultivating a craving that will motivate continued action. Without craving, the habit loop is incomplete. Chapter 3: The Golden Rule of Habit Change. The lesson of transforming habits, grounded in the principle of the Golden Rule of Habit Change, emphasizes the idea that lasting change can happen by altering routines rather than attempting to remove or ignore old cues and rewards. The strategy hinges on replacing one routine with another. By identifying what triggers a specific habit, what response follows, and what reward is gained, it's possible to swap an undesirable routine for a more constructive one without altering the elements around it that reinforce the cycle. This approach ensures that the habit loop remains intact, allowing a person to satisfy their cravings in healthier, more beneficial ways. Take, for example, the journey of a man who struggled with alcoholism. At first, every effort to quit drinking failed. He would enter the familiar environment of a bar, socialize, and experience the familiar routine of ordering drink after drink, only to find himself caught in the same spiral. Yet, there came a breakthrough when he realized that while the drinking itself was destructive, the real driver behind his habit was the need for social connection and relaxation. In seeking ways to create new routines that satisfied this craving without the toxic consequences, he began replacing his habit of drinking with attending group meetings. Here, he formed new friendships and engaged in conversations that filled the same emotional void, slowly reconditioning himself to experience the same satisfaction from a new, healthier behavior. For individuals attempting to break habits, the Golden Rule advises finding a substitute routine that fulfills the same basic need, without the negative implications of the original behavior. When a smoker, for instance, lights up a cigarette during moments of stress, It is not merely the act of smoking that they crave. It is the sense of relief or calm it brings. To replace this routine, some smokers turn to chewing gum or taking deep breaths. Over time, as they reinforce this new behavior during stressful moments, the brain associates the new routine with relaxation, gradually weakening the grip of the old smoking habit. In one example from the business world, a well-known NFL coach transformed his team's performance by introducing simple substitutions in their routines. This coach realized that his team's habitual responses in the face of pressure were often chaotic and ineffective. Recognizing the need to introduce new, structured routines, he worked with his players to respond with calculated, drilled techniques rather than reacting on instinct. The coach did not alter the cues, the tension of the game, or the noise of the stadium, but he substituted the team's panicked responses with practiced routines. As players adopted these new behaviors, their performance improved, showing how impactful the substitution of routines can be in even the most high-pressure situations. In personal lives, the golden rule has been used to replace negative behaviors with productive ones by anchoring the new routines to the existing cues. Imagine a woman who regularly indulges in afternoon snacks out of boredom or routine, rather than hunger. She realized that her craving wasn't necessarily for the food, but for a brief break from work. By substituting her snack routine with a short walk or a few minutes of reading, she maintained the same reward of a mental break without the extra calories, ultimately changing her habit loop while retaining its basic structure. Another story highlights how organizations, too, can apply this rule. A retailer, keen on improving customer experience, noticed that employees often engaged in repetitive, unhelpful behaviors when interacting with customers. By implementing training programs that offered alternative routines, like engaging customers with specific, positive phrases, employees gradually adopted these new routines. These simple changes in their approach to customer interactions led to higher satisfaction and loyalty, illustrating how the golden rule of habit change extends beyond individuals to impact entire organizations. For those struggling with habits, the process can be likened to rewiring the mind. The trick lies in understanding that the cue and reward are the powerful anchors of any habit. It's the routine that can be consciously changed. Chapter 4. Keystone Habits. Keystone habits are unique behaviors that create a cascading effect, driving positive change across various aspects of life. They differ from ordinary habits by having the power to influence and shift other patterns, setting off a chain reaction of transformations without requiring immediate focus on every individual change. Understanding the concept of keystone habits opens up new perspectives on how to approach change, whether in individual routines, corporate structures, or social groups. One powerful example of keystone habits can be seen in the story of Alcoa, an aluminum manufacturing giant. When Paul O'Neill became CEO, he encountered a culture that had grown accustomed to issues of inefficiency and stagnation. Rather than focusing on typical business metrics like increasing profits or cutting costs, he introduced an unconventional focus on one central goal: worker safety. O'Neill's emphasis on safety as a company-wide priority might have seemed narrow, but his vision was far from simplistic. He believed that by establishing safety as a keystone habit, the organization would organically adopt other essential practices to support it, indirectly transforming operations across the board. By directing the company's focus towards safety, O'Neill cultivated a mindset of responsibility and improvement that naturally impacted other aspects of Alcoa's culture. For instance, reporting accidents quickly became essential to maintaining this high safety standard, leading to improved communication channels between workers and management. Safety became the metric by which every employee's actions were measured, creating a shared commitment to excellence that went beyond safety itself. This shared goal necessitated innovations and fostered collaboration, as everyone at Alcoa began looking for ways to make the workplace safer and more efficient. The safety initiative triggered further changes that initially seemed unrelated. For instance, in order to minimize accidents, Alcoa developed new procedures that streamlined various work processes, such as machinery maintenance and task allocations. These small but focused shifts not only enhanced safety, but also increased productivity and employee satisfaction, creating a reinforcing cycle of positive changes. Workers felt heard and valued, leading to greater loyalty and reducing turnover rates. Managers and employees who previously operated in silos found themselves working together to identify and solve safety issues, fostering a collaborative atmosphere that replaced hierarchical isolation with collective responsibility. This transformation illustrates how keystone habits operate as foundational behaviors that act as pillars for broader change. By channeling energy toward a specific, deeply meaningful objective, individuals and organizations often achieve outcomes they would not have expected had they focused on conventional targets. Keystone habits shape other patterns through their inherent connectivity to multiple facets of behavior. In the case of Alcoa, safety wasn't simply a goal. It became a means of embedding a meticulous attention to detail, a culture of accountability, and a strong sense of solidarity throughout the company. These values took root and began to manifest in other areas, enhancing overall performance. The principle of keystone habits also applies to individual lives. Consider the example of exercise, a common keystone habit for many people. Regular exercise tends to impact other behaviors and routines, even those unrelated to fitness itself. Studies have shown that individuals who establish a consistent exercise routine often see improvements in their eating habits, productivity, and stress management. The reason exercise serves as an effective keystone habit lies in its foundational role in health and self-discipline. Establishing a routine of regular exercise requires commitment, planning, and resilience, qualities that transfer to other areas of life, creating a ripple effect of improvement. A particularly interesting aspect of keystone habits is their ability to transform self-identity, which in turn influences choices and behaviors. When people successfully incorporate a keystone habit into their routines, they begin to view themselves differently. A person who exercises regularly may start seeing themselves as someone who values health and wellness, which can make them more inclined to make healthier food choices or engage in other activities that align with their self-image. This shift in identity reinforces the habit itself, strengthening it while simultaneously encouraging further positive behavior changes. Keystone habits can also take root within families, leading to transformations that benefit all members. For example, families who make it a priority to have dinner together regularly often experience improvements in their relationships, communication, and overall family cohesion. Studies have shown that children in families with a consistent dinner routine are likely to perform better academically and develop better social skills. This simple habit of dining together becomes a keystone because it encourages open communication and creates a stable environment where values and responsibilities can be naturally shared. In educational settings, keystone habits manifest in ways that shape students' learning experiences and outcomes. For instance, students who develop the habit of organizing their study schedules often find it easier to maintain focus and meet academic goals. The organizational habit becomes a keystone as it promotes discipline and time management, helping students feel more in control of their learning. This sense of control can build confidence, which further motivates them to take on new challenges and develop resilience in the face of academic stress. Workplace environments that embrace keystone habits often see a similar pattern of transformation. In businesses, keystone habits can be as simple as regular team check-ins or weekly progress reviews. These practices encourage transparency, allow team members to align their goals, and provide consistent opportunities for feedback and problem-solving. As these routines become embedded, they lead to greater accountability and efficiency, with team members becoming more proactive in addressing issues before they escalate. Moreover, they foster a sense of belonging and shared purpose, which strengthens teamwork and boosts morale. The effectiveness of keystone habits lies in their ability to drive change without directly confronting every possible obstacle. By focusing on a core behavior that indirectly influences other aspects, individuals and organizations can gradually shape a supportive ecosystem that naturally encourages desired behaviors. Keystone habits work because they create a foundation that makes other positive actions seem more manageable and sustainable. They allow change to happen organically, as each new behavior is supported by the reinforcing effect of the keystone habit. In financial matters, the concept of keystone habits can also be transformative. One example is the habit of saving a portion of each paycheck. For many, this simple routine fosters a sense of financial responsibility, which can lead to other prudent decisions such as budgeting, debt reduction, and careful spending. Over time, this habit builds financial stability and resilience, allowing people to feel more secure and prepared for the future. The habit of saving regularly is a keystone because it nurtures a mindset of delayed gratification and disciplined planning, which supports long-term financial health. The power of keystone habits extends beyond individual and corporate spheres, affecting communities and even broader societal structures. For example, community initiatives focused on litter cleanup or environmental stewardship often inspire residents to take pride in their surroundings. This shared responsibility for maintaining cleanliness can lead to a greater sense of community ownership, which can have further-reaching effects, such as reducing crime rates and increasing civic engagement. Keystone habits in communities serve as a collective commitment that binds individuals together in pursuit of a common goal, fostering a culture of respect and cooperation. Understanding the unique influence of keystone habits underscores the importance of carefully choosing goals that align with one's core values or organizational mission. By concentrating on a behavior that resonates deeply and aligns with broader aspirations, individuals and organizations can harness the momentum of keystone habits to create lasting and meaningful change. These habits form the backbone of personal growth and success, as well as organizational and societal advancement, by reinforcing positive cycles that build upon each other. Chapter 5: Habit of Success: How Companies Create Habits. To understand how companies establish lasting habits in consumers and employees alike, it is essential to observe how the principles of habit formation are meticulously applied in business settings, especially through targeting specific behaviors, experimenting with triggers, and embedding new routines in subtle ways that eventually become second nature. The science behind this is both subtle and strategic, revealing how seemingly everyday decisions and routines are, in fact, carefully designed responses to behavioral cues. One case that highlights the precision with which habits are created in a company environment revolves around Procter & Gamble's creation of Febreze. When Febreze was initially launched, it was intended to be a groundbreaking product that could eliminate odors from fabrics and the air. The product was expected to be a massive success, as it solved a practical and pervasive issue for many households. However, early sales of Febreze were disappointing, as people were not using it consistently. It soon became clear that even a product addressing a seemingly obvious need would not succeed if consumers didn't incorporate it as a habit. To identify why Febreze wasn't being used, researchers visited customers' homes and observed how people cleaned and interacted with their surroundings. Surprisingly, many individuals had grown so accustomed to certain odors that they were not even aware of them, such as the smells from smoking, cooking, or pets. This insight was critical in recognizing that Febreze, as an odor-eliminating product, wasn't satisfying a craving or need people actively recognized. To make Febreze successful, the company had to embed the product into a new cleaning routine that people would crave. By understanding the craving component of habit formation, the product development team shifted Febreze marketing to associate it with the end of a cleaning routine, rather than an occasional use for odor elimination. The new advertisements showcased Febreze as a finishing touch to the cleaning process, something people could use to leave their homes smelling fresh and clean. This shift meant that people were no longer expected to use Febreze to fix a problem they might not even recognize. Instead, it was positioned as a way to enhance something they already felt satisfied about completing. Soon after this repositioning, sales skyrocketed. Febreze was transformed into a habitual product in millions of households, not because people needed it to solve a specific problem, but because it provided a pleasant, rewarding end to an existing cleaning routine. The role of rewards and routine reinforcement in forming new habits is further illuminated through an example from Starbucks, which built a culture of success by integrating consistent and repeatable routines into employee training. Starbucks recognized that one of the main challenges its employees faced was dealing with difficult customers. The company wanted to ensure that its baristas could handle challenging situations with professionalism, patience, and composure, no matter the circumstances. To address this, Starbucks developed a training program known as Latte, which provided employees with a structured routine to follow whenever they encountered a problematic customer. This approach included listening to the customer, acknowledging their complaint, taking action to resolve it, thanking them for bringing it to their attention, and explaining the situation as needed. What made the Latte system effective was that it went beyond theoretical training and became embedded into the daily actions of Starbucks employees. Through repetition and reinforcement, it became a reflexive response that employees could rely on in high-stress situations. By embedding a consistent, reward-oriented routine, Starbucks was able to create a culture where employees knew precisely how to manage customer complaints without hesitation. This habit of professional handling became so ingrained that it became a distinctive aspect of the Starbucks customer experience, contributing to the brand's reputation for exceptional service and employee consistency. Starbucks' approach illustrates the power of habit-based training systems that empower employees, not only by providing them with tools, but by creating a familiar, reliable routine that can be deployed in a moment of need. Another example of habit-driven success lies in Target's approach to consumer behavior prediction. By analyzing shopping data, Target identified patterns in the purchasing habits of individual customers, specifically those that could predict significant life events. One notable insight involved recognizing when a customer was likely expecting a child based on certain purchasing behaviors, such as the frequency of buying unscented lotion, vitamins, and other specific items. Armed with this knowledge, Target was able to send these customers targeted coupons and advertisements for baby-related products at a time when they were particularly receptive to such marketing. However, because directly targeting customers with advertisements that presumed private knowledge of their lives could be perceived as intrusive, Target adopted a subtler approach. Rather than sending only baby-related offers, Target mixed these promotions with a variety of unrelated items to make the promotions appear more natural. This nuanced approach in customer engagement demonstrates how understanding and strategically influencing customer habits can lead to effective, almost personalized marketing without crossing ethical boundaries. By aligning promotions with the natural ebb and flow of consumer life changes, Target was able to create a reliable system for customer retention and loyalty. The company's habit-forming strategy built a sense of relevance and familiarity with its customers, contributing to a shopping environment where customers felt understood and valued without feeling overtly targeted. Through these examples, it becomes clear that habits in a business context are powerful levers for creating consistency, loyalty, and repeatable success. When companies understand the mechanics of habit formation, including cues, routines, and rewards, they can create systems that anticipate consumer needs, streamline employee actions, and foster predictable outcomes. These systems enable companies to achieve goals that would otherwise require intensive and constant intervention, as habits once formed tend to operate automatically. By creating environments that encourage specific cues, reinforcing routines that lead to reliable rewards, and continuously evaluating the impact of these behaviors, businesses can craft a culture of success where desired behaviors are habitual rather than forced. The science of habit formation allows companies to navigate complex human behavior and create products, services, and work environments that align naturally with people's existing routines and desires. It demonstrates the potential for businesses to leverage psychology to create environments that fulfill consumer needs, provide clear, manageable routines for employees, and build habits that contribute to the company's long-term growth and stability. The habit loop's strategic application is an invaluable tool that businesses can use to shape consumer behavior, foster workplace efficiency, and ultimately create a sustainable advantage in competitive industries. Chapter 6. The Power of a Crisis. When a crisis strikes, it can lay bare hidden flaws in a system, challenge established routines, and force leaders to act in ways they might never consider under normal circumstances. This notion is illustrated by examining how certain companies have used crises not just to weather difficulties but to create powerful and lasting organizational transformations. A prime example of this approach is showcased by looking at a large aluminum company that was able to overhaul its entire culture by focusing on a specific area of concern. workplace safety. Years ago, Alcoa, a prominent American aluminum manufacturer, was struggling with stagnation. Its efficiency had plateaued, profits were stable but unimpressive, and the company was perceived as unremarkable in terms of innovation. When a new leader took the helm, he recognized the need for an overhaul but understood that simply mandating change would not be enough to shift deeply ingrained behaviors within the workforce. Rather than attacking all facets of the company at once, he decided to focus on a single priority, one that would have ripple effects across the organization: employee safety. His strategy was unconventional, particularly because most people expected a new CEO to focus on profits, production goals, or expansion. When he announced that the primary goal would be to transform Alcoa into the safest company in the industry, many were skeptical. Financial analysts, investors, and even some employees found it strange that he didn't emphasize profit-driven targets. However, his reasoning was strategic and rooted in the understanding that prioritizing safety would influence how people worked, communicated, and thought about their roles. Safety protocols, by nature, require meticulous planning, clear communication, and rapid responsiveness, all elements that are vital for operational excellence. In an industry where heavy machinery, molten metal, and high-temperature furnaces are part of daily operations, even minor mishaps can result in severe injuries or fatalities. By enforcing strict safety measures, he was pushing the company to operate with a higher level of precision and accountability. The strategy began to take effect in surprising ways. To ensure safety across all levels, each department was asked to examine its practices, identify potential risks, and submit concrete plans for improvement. Managers were expected to communicate new safety measures regularly, and employees were encouraged to report any safety hazards without fear of repercussion. This push for open communication extended beyond just reporting hazards. It fostered an atmosphere where feedback was not only tolerated but encouraged. Workers on the factory floor, who had once felt voiceless, suddenly found themselves empowered to contribute to the safety discussion, knowing that their insights were valued. This shift in communication was profound, creating new channels for collaboration that didn't previously exist. Over time, Alcoa's focus on safety became not just a protocol but a core part of its identity. This identity extended from the factory floor to the boardroom. The emphasis on safety required departments to cooperate in ways they had never done before, bridging gaps between management and employees. Every level of the company became engaged in a collective mission, and this unified sense of purpose led to noticeable improvements in morale and productivity. The benefits of this approach were not confined to safety alone. As the focus on preventing injuries deepened, Alcoa developed a sharper attention to detail, which naturally led to increased efficiency and fewer production errors. By honing the habit of rigorous safety checks, employees became accustomed to closely monitoring every part of the production process. This increased vigilance was contagious. Departments began to notice other areas where improvements could be made. Managers became more comfortable addressing inefficiencies and tackling issues that once seemed too entrenched to change. The commitment to safety, a seemingly singular goal, served as a gateway to wider operational transformations. The habits employees developed in pursuit of safety, meticulous planning, careful monitoring, and open communication, translated effortlessly into practices that benefited other areas of the business. Even though safety was the explicit goal, it implicitly became a catalyst for enhanced productivity. As employees became accustomed to the discipline and diligence required to maintain a safe work environment, these qualities permeated other aspects of their jobs. People grew more conscientious, and routines that had once been viewed as mundane now felt meaningful as they contributed to a safer, more efficient workplace. The transformation extended beyond day-to-day operations and began to influence the company's entire culture. Investors, who had initially doubted the wisdom of this safety-first approach, began to see the results in Alcoa's performance metrics. As productivity improved and production costs declined, Alcoa's financial outlook brightened, resulting in increased shareholder value. But perhaps the most powerful outcome of this transformation was the level of trust it fostered across the organization. The safety initiative had broken down hierarchical barriers and encouraged employees at all levels to engage openly and collaboratively. People were no longer working in isolated silos. They were operating as part of an interconnected system, each member accountable to one another. The commitment to safety fostered a sense of responsibility that transcended individual roles. Employees came to realize that their adherence to safety protocols protected not only themselves but also their colleagues. This sense of mutual responsibility strengthened bonds within teams and departments. Alcoa had developed an environment where each person felt accountable for both the success of their department and the well-being of their peers. Years later, Alcoa's remarkable transformation would be attributed to a single strategic decision: using a crisis as a catalyst for habit change. By reframing the crisis of stagnation as an opportunity to develop safer and more efficient practices, the company had shifted from a culture of complacency to one of continuous improvement. The focus on safety ultimately equipped Alcoa with the habits needed to adapt and thrive in a rapidly changing business environment. In the end, the lesson was clear. Even the most complex organizational challenges can be overcome by leveraging a simple but powerful habit, such as prioritizing safety. Chapter 7. When companies predict and manipulate habits. In a competitive world where companies seek to better understand and anticipate the behavior of their customers, the most successful organizations rely heavily on a powerful tool: data. The ability to predict customer habits and even influence those habits can offer a distinct edge in the marketplace. For businesses, knowing when and how a customer will act can drive everything from marketing strategies to product offerings, creating more seamless interactions and maximizing revenue. This is achieved through deep insight into consumer behavior patterns, and one of the most significant examples of this method comes from a company that, at first glance, might not seem so invasive or manipulative: Target. The retail giant has developed a system so precise in predicting consumer behavior that it can often forecast specific life changes, such as pregnancy, before the individual is even aware of it themselves. Through sophisticated data mining, Target has honed its ability to track customer purchasing habits and use that information to craft personalized advertising campaigns. The company's analysis of shopping trends allows them to predict with remarkable accuracy when a woman is likely to be pregnant, based on purchasing patterns such as the sudden buying of unscented lotions, vitamins, and a shift toward specific brands. Once the system detects these buying behaviors, Target can send coupons for baby-related products, tailored to the specific stage of pregnancy. This predictive capability is not just the result of a few random factors. It comes from the careful analysis of the ways people's purchasing habits change in response to certain life events. By using data like this, companies can push customers toward specific purchases, sometimes even before they realize they want or need those products. Such predictive power doesn't stop at understanding consumers' personal life events. Companies use similar techniques to alter the way consumers interact with products. For example, they can influence when and how often a customer buys a product, shaping their purchasing habits over time. With a keen understanding of buying patterns, they can send reminders, offers, and discounts that are strategically designed to prompt purchases at the optimal moment. In essence, businesses learn how to anticipate desires, not just fulfill them. The sophistication of these techniques extends beyond simple data gathering. In some cases, companies invest in creating highly detailed customer profiles. These profiles take into account a person's past behaviors, preferences, and even predict their future actions based on those patterns. Marketers can use this profile to craft highly targeted advertisements, personalized emails, and tailored offers, all of which aim to guide the consumer down a carefully plotted path. They may not even need to push very hard. Instead, by subtly reinforcing existing habits or offering just the right incentive, these businesses ensure that the consumer is nudged in the direction they want. One significant case study involves the retail industry's ability to not just predict but also shape consumer habits. Companies like Target and Amazon employ extensive algorithms designed to track customer activity on a granular level. These systems analyze every click, every search, and every purchase, which can be aggregated and analyzed to anticipate future behavior. When Target System identifies the early signs of pregnancy in a customer, for instance, it doesn't stop there. The system continues to track that individual's buying habits, sending them targeted offers and tailored ads that nudge the customer into becoming more loyal, more frequent, and more likely to share their personal data. The extent to which these companies can predict and influence consumer behavior is further evidenced by the strategic manipulation of purchase timing. By analyzing purchasing patterns, companies can identify when a customer is most likely to be in the mood for a particular product. They know that certain times of day, month, or year are more likely to result in purchases, and can time promotions to align with these periods. This manipulation is not always overt. Often, it takes the form of subtle reminders or strategically timed ads that make consumers more likely to act on impulse, rather than considering their decisions carefully. In some cases, companies don't just rely on predicting behavior, they actively foster new habits. One of the key tools in this process is the development of loyalty programs, designed to create a sense of routine and dependence on a particular brand. The goal is to make the habit of purchasing from a specific company so ingrained that it becomes an automatic response. When a customer earns rewards or benefits for regular shopping, they begin to associate those rewards with the act of purchasing, creating a cycle of habit reinforcement. Over time, this makes it harder for the consumer to break the habit, even when they might find a better deal elsewhere. Loyalty programs, in essence, are designed to make consumers feel as though they are doing something beneficial for themselves, even though the company is the true beneficiary. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these business strategies is how they blend predictive capabilities with the psychological principles of habit formation. Companies recognize that they are not just predicting what customers will do. They are shaping those behaviors by creating triggers, rewards, and routines. By carefully designing habit loops that encourage consumers to return to their products or services, businesses effectively turn their customers into repeat buyers without them even realizing it. This blend of predictive analytics and psychological manipulation makes for an extremely powerful business tool, allowing companies to dominate markets and create long-term customer loyalty. The ethical considerations of such practices are complex. On one hand, companies are providing consumers with personalized services that can be incredibly convenient, like receiving a discount on a product they need at just the right time. On the other hand, the question arises of whether this level of predictive power crosses a line into manipulation. When a company knows more about an individual's life than the individual does themselves, and uses that information to guide their purchasing decisions, it raises significant concerns about privacy and consumer autonomy. Ultimately, the key lesson here is the extent to which businesses can predict and manipulate habits through data. By understanding consumer behavior, tracking it meticulously, and responding with precisely timed incentives and ads, companies can shape the way people act, often without them even realizing it. This understanding of consumer habits provides an invaluable advantage in the marketplace, but it also calls attention to the power that companies have over the choices people make and the ways in which they can influence behavior. The ability to predict habits is not just a marketing strategy. It is an insight into the very way human beings interact with the world, and it is one that companies are increasingly mastering. Chapter 8: How Movements Happen. In the story of how movements happen, there is an essential understanding that the development and growth of social movements are deeply rooted in patterns of behavior, specifically habits. These habits, although often unnoticed, play a critical role in the rise of social changes. Social movements, from small-scale protests to large-scale revolutions, spread because individuals, often without conscious thought, become compelled to adopt certain behaviors that align with a collective goal. A particular story is told about the civil rights movement and how a simple act of defiance catalyzed a movement that shook the foundations of a nation. The movement began when Rosa Parks, a woman of quiet determination, refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. While this act of resistance was singular in nature, it was not a random or isolated event. It was a direct response to a long-standing pattern of systemic oppression. Her act of defiance was not only a rejection of the status quo but also an expression of the deep-seated frustrations of an entire community. What made this moment so powerful was not just the act itself, but the rapid way in which it resonated with the collective memory of others who had similar experiences, fueling their desire for change. Park's action became a key event, triggering the potential for broader change through a chain of reactions. In understanding how movements like this gain traction, it becomes clear that they are not simply born from individual acts of courage or outbursts of frustration. Rather, movements grow because of how they tap into existing social habits, especially those related to group behavior and social pressure. The behaviors of individuals in a group create a social habit loop, one that is deeply influenced by relationships, trust, and the actions of key figures within a community. These habits can trigger emotions, and the behavior patterns of a few influential individuals can inspire broader collective actions. A moment of individual action can then be amplified through the social dynamics that develop among a group. The strength of a movement lies in its ability to form new habits within a society. The initial actions, whether they be protests, acts of civil disobedience, or other forms of resistance, begin to shift the collective habits of a group. What is vital to the spread of any movement is the role that specific individuals, often those who hold influence, play in facilitating this shift. These individuals serve as the connectors, the hubs of the social network, and it is their participation that gives the movement the momentum it needs to grow. Social hubs, or individuals who are central within a social structure, often act as the catalysts for collective change. They influence others not only by their actions but by their ability to build trust and create connections that encourage others to join. A movement's success is further amplified by its ability to align with the existing habits and emotions of its participants. For example, the civil rights movement capitalized on a deeply ingrained sense of injustice and frustration that had long been felt in the African American community. It leveraged the habit of collective action within this community, which had been nurtured over generations through smaller acts of resistance, such as church meetings, organized boycotts, and other forms of civil engagement. This habit of organizing and fighting back against injustice was a powerful undercurrent that made the success of the movement more likely. Moreover, the spread of the movement is also dependent on how it is framed. The framing of an issue, the way it is presented and understood, can have a profound impact on whether or not people choose to join the cause. If a movement's message resonates deeply with the desires and values of individuals, it can quickly become part of their habitual way of thinking and acting. For instance, the message of equality and justice in the civil rights movement spoke to a fundamental desire for fairness that was not just limited to the African American community, but also found resonance with other marginalized groups, giving the movement a broader appeal. The success of any movement is also tied to its ability to create new social norms. A new movement changes not only what people do, but what they believe is acceptable and normal. In the case of the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, the initial act of Rosa Parks not only changed the way people behaved on buses, but it also helped to shift public opinion about segregation. The habit of segregation, which had been a deeply embedded part of society, was challenged as individuals began to see it as not just a legal issue, but a moral one. Over time, the habits of individuals shift from personal actions to societal changes. The influence of key figures, the spread of social connections, and the framing of the movement all contribute to the creation of new social habits. Once a movement has taken root, it often evolves into a collective, habitual behavior that shapes future decisions and actions. The willingness of individuals to engage in protest or civil disobedience becomes a new, learned behavior that is then passed on to others, building upon the original actions. There is also an important lesson in how movements manage to sustain themselves over time. It is not enough for a movement to gain initial traction. It must also be able to maintain the momentum it has generated. A movement can stagnate if it is unable to create new habits among its members. This is why many social movements rely on regular, repeated actions, demonstrations, meetings, or even symbolic gestures that reinforce the movement's core values and goals. These repeated actions form a routine that becomes part of the participants' habits. The longer the movement continues, the more ingrained its behaviors become in the collective psyche of the group. The power of social influence is also evident in how movements interact with external forces. The response of those in power, whether it be the government, business leaders, or other institutions, can either hinder or support the growth of a movement. Movements that face opposition can often gain strength as a result of that opposition. The presence of resistance can deepen the resolve of participants and attract new supporters who view the movement as a cause worth fighting for. The resistance, in essence, becomes another force that reinforces the social habit loop. Ultimately, the growth of a movement depends on its ability to build and maintain momentum. The habit of resistance, once formed, takes on a life of its own, continuing to spread as more people join in and contribute to the cause. The process is not instantaneous, and it requires careful attention to the habits that drive behavior. But once a movement has begun to shift the collective habits of a society, it becomes nearly impossible to reverse. It is a transformative process, one that builds on the actions of individuals and grows through the power of social connections and shared beliefs. This story highlights the underlying principles of social change, showing that at its core, a movement is not just a collection of people. It is a collection of habits. The spread of these habits can transform entire societies, creating a new set of norms and behaviors that are, over time, seen as not only acceptable but inevitable. Movements are successful because they tap into deeply ingrained social habits and use them to create a new, collective way of thinking and acting. The key to understanding how movements happen lies in recognizing the power of habits, both individual and collective, and how they shape the course of history. Chapter 9. Free Will. Are we responsible for our habits? In the book's discussion about free will and our responsibility for our habits, the focus shifts to the complex relationship between automatic behaviors and personal choice. The core of the lesson is that while habits might seem like automatic, uncontrollable actions, they are, in fact, deeply intertwined with the choices we make and the routines we establish over time. There is a great deal of control that we can assert over our habits, though it requires an understanding of how habits are formed and how they function within our lives. The concept of habit loops, cues, routines, and rewards sets the foundation for this idea. Our habits are not random, they are learned patterns. And while we often follow these patterns without consciously thinking about them, they do not operate independently of our decisions. In fact, understanding the habit loop provides a powerful tool for taking responsibility for the behavior we exhibit. The ability to recognize the cues that trigger our actions, the routines we follow, and the rewards we seek is the first step in gaining control over our habits. This lesson emphasizes that by changing one part of the loop, particularly the routine, we can alter the outcome. Just as we are capable of developing bad habits, we also possess the capacity to intentionally form better ones. The fact that habits are learned means they can be unlearned or transformed. However, this process does not happen instantly. Change requires an effort of will and the ability to experiment with new routines that deliver the same rewards. It is through this trial and error, combined with the consistency of repetition, that we begin to change the patterns that no longer serve us well. At the heart of this understanding is the acknowledgement that responsibility plays a central role in habit formation. Many people might believe that habits are something that simply happen to them, that they have little control over their behavior. This belief can lead to frustration, as individuals feel trapped by their routines. However, the reality is that habits don't control us in an absolute sense. Instead, it is the choices we make repeatedly day after day that form the routines which become ingrained habits. By recognizing that every habit begins with a choice, the first lesson is about reclaiming the power of choice. An illustrative example within this context involves a person trying to quit smoking. The cue for smoking might be stress or a specific social environment, and the reward might be temporary relief from anxiety. However, understanding the habit loop means the person has the ability to recognize the cue and replace the routine, perhaps by taking a short walk or practicing deep breathing exercises instead of reaching for a cigarette. The crucial aspect is that the reward still needs to be satisfied, and through this process of substitution, the brain can eventually start associating the cue with the new, healthier routine. A significant lesson here is that our habits do not define us, and they are not set in stone. Many believe that they are simply who they are, but habits are far more malleable than most people realize. If someone can cultivate the will to change, they can reshape their habits and thus change their lives. The book stresses that the ability to change is available to everyone. It's not a matter of being inherently good or bad at maintaining habits. It's about recognizing the flexibility that exists in how we respond to cues. Another key idea is that while habits are powerful, they are not the only force at play in our behavior. Environmental influences, societal expectations, and the people around us all affect how we behave, but our ability to modify our habits is always within our control. This is particularly significant because it demonstrates that external factors, though influential, do not wholly define our behavior. Instead, we have the opportunity to act on our own decisions and make deliberate choices to change how we respond to those external influences. One of the most important aspects of habit change is the acknowledgement that it is not a simple one-time event. It requires persistence, commitment, and the repeated application of new behaviors to gradually replace old ones. This is where the idea of free will intersects with habit change. It is not merely about choosing to stop a bad habit once, but about continually choosing to reinforce a new behavior over time. The lesson here is that our willpower is a muscle that can be strengthened with practice, but it is not infinite. For lasting change, the process of replacing old habits with new ones must be ongoing. What is also emphasized is that, in many cases, understanding the structure of a habit loop is not enough to change it. Instead, changing habits often requires a deep understanding of the rewards we are chasing. If we are to successfully replace a habit, we must understand the need that the original routine was satisfying. If we fail to address the root cause, the deeper emotional or psychological need behind the behavior, then the new routine is unlikely to stick. For example, if a person replaces smoking with eating, but the deeper need is stress relief, they might find themselves facing a different problem altogether. To truly change, the replacement habit must fulfill the same reward as the original habit did, but in a healthier or more constructive way. This idea also leads to the recognition that willpower alone is not always enough to change deeply ingrained habits. It is not simply a matter of trying harder, but of setting up the conditions for success. This is where environmental factors play a crucial role. The lesson here is that creating an environment that supports the new habit can be just as important as the internal motivation to change. If someone is trying to eat healthier, for example, having healthier food readily available and eliminating tempting foods from their environment can make it easier to stick to the new habit. Our environment influences our behavior more than we often realize, and creating a supportive environment is a key part of successfully making lasting changes. The lesson extends to the idea that free will is not merely about the ability to choose, but about choosing to create an environment that fosters good habits. It is the ability to make decisions that support our long-term goals and values. In a sense, we are responsible for shaping the environments around us, just as much as we are responsible for shaping our responses to those environments. This responsibility is empowering because it places the power of change in our hands. By setting up our surroundings in a way that encourages positive behaviors, we are actively taking responsibility for our future selves. In conclusion, the lesson about free will and responsibility for our habits highlights that while we may feel as though habits control us, we ultimately have the power to change them. Understanding the habit loop, recognizing the importance of rewards, and replacing routines with conscious decisions are all essential components in taking control of our habits. Our ability to choose, repeatedly and consistently, to alter the routines that no longer serve us is at the heart of transforming our habits. We are not defined by the habits we have formed, but by the choices we make to change them. The lesson here is that we are not merely victims of our habits. We are their creators, and we can choose to create habits that align with our goals and values. This understanding provides the empowerment necessary to take charge of our lives and change the patterns that hold us back. Appendix: How to Change Habits. In the process of changing habits, there are several key lessons that focus on the power of recognizing patterns, understanding triggers, and establishing new routines. The journey begins by acknowledging the habit loop, which consists of three essential parts: the cue, the routine, and the reward. Every habit operates within this framework, whether it is an unconscious action like brushing teeth or a more complex routine like going for a run each morning. The first step in changing any habit is to identify this loop. Understanding the specific cue that triggers the habit and the reward that follows helps reveal why certain behaviors become automatic. Once the habit loop is identified, the next step is to experiment with new routines. The idea is not to eliminate the craving or the reward, but to replace the routine with something that still satisfies the same craving. This is where the power of habit transformation lies, not in denying the brain its rewards but in providing it in a new way. For example, someone who seeks a sugar rush every afternoon could replace their habitual snack of candy with a piece of fruit or a cup of tea. The reward, the feeling of satisfaction, is still achieved, but the routine, the process to achieve it, has changed. This is how new habits begin to form and become ingrained. At this stage, consistency becomes essential. Changing a habit is not a quick fix. It requires repetition and persistence. New behaviors must be practiced consistently for the brain to adjust. Just like learning a new skill, this repetition makes the new behavior feel natural and eventually automatic. The key is to keep the new routine simple and effective, ensuring it can easily fit into daily life and align with the craving. A simple yet rewarding practice, such as taking a walk every time the urge to stress eat arises, will eventually replace the old habit if the person sticks with it. Furthermore, there is an important distinction between conscious effort and automatic behavior. In the beginning, changing a habit demands a high level of conscious effort. One must think about every step of the new routine. Over time, however, as the brain becomes familiar with the new routine, the behavior begins to shift into a more automatic state. The brain no longer needs to actively think about the steps involved in the routine. It becomes second nature and the habit is established. Another critical point is the need for patience. Habits don't change overnight. It is important to set realistic expectations and understand that slip-ups are a natural part of the process. This means that one should not be discouraged by occasional setbacks. The key is to stay committed and keep refining the habit loop. Every attempt, whether successful or not, contributes to the learning process. Just as one doesn't expect to master a new skill after a single try, habits too require time and practice to be fully embedded in daily life. To successfully change a habit, it is also helpful to make the new behavior part of an existing routine. This is known as stacking a habit. If someone already has a well-established habit, such as drinking a cup of coffee every morning, they can use that as a cue to introduce a new behavior. For example, after drinking coffee, they might decide to meditate for 5 minutes. The act of drinking coffee already triggers the habit loop, making it easier to incorporate a new behavior without feeling overwhelmed by the need to create an entirely new routine. The power of social support cannot be underestimated when changing habits. People are influenced by the habits of those around them. As individuals begin to embrace new habits, sharing the process with others helps reinforce commitment. This social reinforcement creates a positive feedback loop where friends, family, or colleagues can encourage and motivate one another to continue with their efforts. The collective nature of human behavior plays a significant role in the sustainability of new habits. The more people around you adopt similar habits, the more likely it is that these behaviors will be maintained. It is also important to recognize that changing a habit often requires a change in identity. This can be especially evident in long-term transformations. Someone trying to quit smoking, for instance, may not only need to change their routine of smoking but also how they perceive themselves. The shift from seeing oneself as a smoker to viewing oneself as a non-smoker is a powerful motivator for change. The new identity must be aligned with the behaviors being adopted. If a person continues to view themselves as a smoker, no amount of changed behavior will be enough to sustain the habit transformation. It is the new self-concept that solidifies the change, and this identity shift is one of the key components of lasting transformation. Setting goals that are both specific and attainable is another practical approach to creating new habits. Setting vague goals like, "I will exercise more," lacks clarity and direction. Instead, goals should be concrete, such as, "I will walk for 30 minutes every morning before work." Clear goals with specific actions create a roadmap for success. By setting small, achievable steps, individuals can build confidence as they accomplish each part of their plan. This confidence then fuels further progress, creating a sense of accomplishment that motivates them to continue. Tracking progress is also a powerful tool in changing habits. Keeping a record of one's behavior helps maintain awareness of the process. This could involve writing down how often the new habit was performed or noting the emotional state before and after completing the routine. Tracking progress serves as both a reminder and a motivator. It can highlight improvements and provide insight into patterns that might otherwise be overlooked. Additionally, when progress is visible, it reinforces the belief that change is possible, which strengthens the individual's commitment to the new behavior. Finally, it is important to have a clear understanding of the underlying motivation for change. Understanding the why behind the habit change makes the process much more powerful. Whether the goal is to become healthier, more productive, or simply to feel more in control, identifying the core reason for wanting to change gives the individual the drive to push through challenges. Motivation is not always constant, and there will be days when the urge to return to old habits feels overwhelming. During these times, reminding oneself of the deeper purpose behind the change can help restore focus and determination. By applying these principles of habit change, identifying the habit loop, experimenting with new routines, being consistent, having patience, stacking habits, seeking social support, shifting identity, setting clear goals, tracking progress, and staying motivated, anyone can successfully transform their habits. While the journey may not be easy, it is entirely possible to reshape one's routines and behaviors for a more positive, productive, and fulfilling life.